I've yet to have my second coffee, which I normally take about 3 coffees to wake up. It's one of the things about being a writer, of course, is you don't have to necessarily turn up to work. So your time frame and how you organize your day has a certain charm to it, which other careers don't have. And that's one of the things we could talk about later on. So thank you for joining us today, and thank you for all your questions. You can type in questions as we go, but as we're waiting for more people to join, and I thought I'd just give a quick, a little bit of an overview, a bit of a chat. Historically, of course, my journey is very specific to a time and a place and an environment, a business environment and a publishing environment that has changed significantly. So there's not a lot that, while that has a biographical or autobiographical interest to some people, it's of absolutely no interest or support or help to anybody who's starting in the industry now. So what I'll try and do is I'll try and keep my as much of the information as I can, not going on a down memory lane and talking about the good old days, but I'll try and make it as contemporary and appropriately significant to how the market is currently operating. Some things never change, some things are universal. And fortunately, in children's publishing, especially in picture books, in the, let's say the 18-month to 5-year-old age group, or even 8-year-old, that hasn't changed a great deal in either internationally or temporally in terms of the difference between now and 20 years ago. In so much as children need and use stories to understand the world, and they use stories as a safe way to explore beyond the 4 walls of their home, if they're fortunate enough to live in a home. So books have evolved as this singular and unique way of packaging an experience. And there's several things that I wanted to talk about in that, which is the things that are not really fully appreciated, I think, or understood, but are important when you first start out writing children's books, is that children are learning how to unpack a book when they first experience a picture book. They're learning all the narrative skills of visual storytelling, how an image connects with words, how a story starts here and then goes through a sequence of moments and ends over here. We, as adults, take all that for granted, but it's of course because we've been through that experience such a long time ago that we can't really remember it. Most children will very often will quite happily read a book from the back if they're just left with a book. Or they'll open it in the middle and just start looking at the pages and flick forward or back and so forth. So if you put very young children with picture books, of course, they're entirely looking at the images, and going forwards or going backwards is of no consequence to them. And so they're not actually they're evolving a narrative that is image-based, single image-based, with no conscious understanding that these images have been developed to be sequential and to call out a series of events that will lead to the telling of a story. Now that is fundamental, right? And we forget it. We forget it very, very quickly. So one of the core things about writing children's books, particularly young picture books for the very young, is that you're putting together the architecture, the narrative architecture, in very well considered ways that have proven themselves over time to work. And they've proven themselves with thousands of experts, teachers, librarians, publishers, educationalists, consultants, mums, dads, grandparents, all feeding into a common understanding of why this works and why this doesn't. And the best way for that common understanding to operate is because the book remains successful. It remains on the shelves. And over many, many years, parents and grandparents will come back to that book when they've then got a young nephew arriving in the world, or a friend. They go, oh, I've got a book that's perfect. You must read this to them. And that is it's a shared piece of social engineering that we've all participated in that allows a picture book to do its job really, really well. And if you break those rules, or if you don't understand those rules, or if you haven't absorbed those rules as an adult and gone back into a kid's, say, going to a kid's library or school's library, pull out loads of picture books that you've never read before, and actually, or sit and watch children reading a picture book and reacquaint yourself with, there is a learning process going on here, which is the cornerstone to literacy for children, and how we use a book in what, not just picture books then, but all books, whether it be a coffee table, adult book around, car mechanics or whatever. We've learned that narrative very young. So part of what I want to do is just talk a little bit of the fact that there are two aspects to this. There is that underlying architecture that has grown, just like it will with a piece of music, that we understand what a short form short story looks like, or a short piece of music looks like, or a full orchestral suite looks like. And what are the ebbs and flows in that, in the way that we absorb that and feel good and feel right about it and how it delivers. We smash that and break it as we grow older. And that's the whole point of it, is that you do new and exciting and push the boundaries of the sandbox out and kick the sand up in everybody's face. But the sandbox is there. It's been built over time, because for very, very young readers, it's introducing them to all this body of knowledge. So before we get into content, I just wanted to go through that, because some people go, why is a book a certain length? Why are the page sizes, etc., etc.? One of the things to be aware of, and I know this sounds kind of crazy in that, but is how big little hands are, how they hold a book, how they feel for the edge of the page, how they turn the page, and all the rest of it. And that speaks to the age group that has developed into a series of rules for publishers and for writers and illustrators on why a book is manufactured in a certain way for a specific age group. Now, those age groups are, broadly speaking, your first books are read to you, right? And so the industry tends to call those shared readers. So mum, dad, older sibling, uncle, teacher, whoever is reading the book to the whole class or to a single child, and they are guiding them through the process of, you start here, you turn the page, and you see how this is starting to tell a story. And then all those rules of, let's turn the page, what's going to happen next, all those little bits of visual engineering that make a picture pop, and the lines going, and ... turn the page, whoa, big image, this is what happens. No words on that page because the image tells it all. Now let's go to the next page and explain what we just saw on the other page. Or there's rules about, make sure that you're explaining what's happening in the text against an image that's on that opposite page or the same page. All those little basic pieces of mechanics. And I'm not going to go into any more of that today on this session. I just wanted to cement it there as a whole piece of understanding that the way children absorb and experience books is defined very much by years and years of the industry knowing this type of experience for this age group, this type of experience for this age group. Clearly, outside of the norm, there are different. There are children who read for much older or are self-reading a lot earlier, etc., etc. But the industry has these basics, and it's very, very important if you want to be published by, if you're not, even if you're self-publishing, but if you want to be published by a leading publisher, that you really, really do acquaint yourself with these rules. And the best way to do it is spend time in the library, spend time in a local school, watch kids reading, sit down with nieces, nephews, your own children, and really understand how they're engaging with the book. And more importantly, when they're disengaging. One of the most humbling experiences for any writer and illustrator is when you take into a school a book you've drafted it up, you think it's the most wonderful thing ever, and then you start to read them and you're really excited and you get to page 3 and you look up and the children are just all untying their shoelaces or lying looking at the ceiling and are completely disengaged. And that comes as a bit of a shock, and you've got to really figure out, maybe it was your performance as a reader, maybe it wasn't the material, but usually it's the material. So it's a good opportunity to take stock. Cool. So I'm going to go to some of the questions. I'm sorry, I have to switch screens to do this. And please feel free to put questions up in the chat section. So how do you keep your characters in character? How do you know what actions they take overall and even what they'll be like in different circumstances, good days, bad days, angry? In terms of writing for, picture books, that question comes to the heart of when something's a one-off book, or when you're imagining it as part of a series of books. And this is really quite a significant issue around a lot of picture books for young children. And I'm talking about very young children. They have a single storyline where the character is going on a learning curve and they become a different character or a better character, or they've understood something and it's changed them. Because that's what children are often reading storybooks about. How do I not be scared of the dark? How do I deal with the fact there's 5 kids and I don't socialize very well? How do I get on with? How do we play together? How do I overcome my fear of moving house because we're about to go to another town? Books are often written around really good books are a way to bring real life events into a story form that mums and dads, uncles and aunts and so forth can go, I know just the book. We're off to the dentist tomorrow. Let's take the fear of what that means out of the chemistry. Or it's, got bullied at school today, or some kid took the toy and my child fought back and cracked the other kid over the head with the toy. They're very often, children's books are great to have a library of these books that are specific to certain circumstances. And so in those events, the character goes on a very specific journey, and you define the character and create the character with that bit of their personality missing, or that's the wish list. That's the thing they long to be, not to be scared of the dark. They long to be able to run faster, or be stronger, or be taller, or why can't I climb that tree like my big brother? And then climbing the tree isn't the problem. It's actually, there's something you can do that the big kid can't do. You can go into the hole of the tree that he can't fit in. All those sorts of things which are about, you can't do this, but you're empowered to do that. And later on in life, you're going to do that other thing as well. So enjoy what's in the moment. So books for kids, very often a character is defined by that single event and that single learning moment. When it's then successful and you want to do another book because people say, oh, we loved that book, kids are loving it, but there's nowhere to take that character because you've successfully taken them on that journey and they've evolved. In television series where there may be 52 episodes, you've got to obviously try not to evolve that character because the whole point of that character is they may love discovery. They may be some kid who just has got a thirst for knowledge. And so you just let that thirst for knowledge be the thing to drive them forward. But you don't want them to learn something in episode 5 that then you've got to figure out how does that make them different in episode 27. Each episode and then each piece of information or knowledge they go after is unique to that story, but their underlying character driver is that they're inquisitive. And so being inquisitive doesn't change unless that's the story, right? You get stung by a bee and you no longer become inquisitive because you think that being inquisitive is painful and the world scares you and you shut yourself up in your house. So then the story is about try to be inquisitive again. Don't let one bad experience knock you flat. So writing a picture book for children, you don't tend to think or worry about how you keep that character consistent and what's going to happen beyond that story. When it comes to writing stories that are part of a series, whether it be things like the Harry Potter series or the Babysitter's Club, anything which is clearly an evolving, to go back to my age group, Anne of Green Gables, some of the great stories that have a central character who does grow, then that growth, if you're very, very smart, like J.K. Rowling, she had a vision for that character's growth right from day one and evolved the telling of those stories in a very, very well-structured way that allowed the unpacking of that character to take place sequentially, and also allowed the audiences to grow with the unpacking of that character. A lot of that clearly was circumstantial with the success of the first book, but reading everything that she's written, you get a sense that there was absolute clarity that all of this was understood by her early on, or a lot of it was, and therefore she was able to create Harry and the other characters in the form of which they were and give them the lessons and the learning that they needed. But that's incredibly, incredibly hard to do, and also is a massive undertaking that hinges on the success of the first book. To be able to think in terms of the long term right at the start is obviously a marathon journey that most people don't undertake. So the short answer to your question then, I guess, is that your learning evolves with the learning of your characters. And you sometimes may have painted yourself into a corner and can't do certain things with a character because of the early work that you structured it. That was a very long answer, so I apologize if it got a little bit too heavy. Second question is, how do you maintain the enthusiasm and motivation to see a story through to the end? Not sure if you mean as a writer or as a reader. So I'll assume I'll talk to both. Obviously, if you're developing a story that's, if you like, for older kids, that's a chapter-based story, say like Dragon Blade, then the ebb and flow of that adventure is part of the craft, and it's hard to really know how to deliver that other than to be able to do generalizations, which is there has to be a big hook. There has to be something which you're slowly unpacking on behalf of the lead character. And you don't forget what you're unpacking. You don't go off on a tangent and have another adventure and then, oh, yeah, I've actually forgotten the main point of the story is this. So you've got to really be quite clear in how you're going to put the breadcrumbs of the main story as reveals that allow the main adventure to be pulling the audience along through the story. And usually sitting on the shoulder of the lead character, so you're being pulled along. Where the motivation gets trickier, or I certainly find it harder as a reader, is when the writer is bouncing between multiple characters. And in Dragonblade, that is one of the challenges. Dragonblade has been written, in a sense, to be the sandpit for a primetime scripted drama kind of streamer series like a Netflix or what have you, where you are constantly bouncing between characters. You're constantly going from maybe there's 8 stories underway, and you sit with each character, and then you leave them maybe with a cliffhanger moment or a problem to solve or a moment of peace, and you move to the next character, and you keep bouncing that through. It's much easier to do in television because it's very impactful to come into the next moment with a character using all the camera techniques and the storytelling techniques to be able to grab and engage the viewer, so they're not cross with you because you've just left the other story behind. So when in Dragonblade, I was very, very clear to myself that when I jumped to the next character, I had to find a way in just a couple of sentences to make make the reader want to still be with the story and not be going, oh, I wanted to stay with Jane and what she's doing up in the cave. So that's part of the technique, really. So that's more the technique of writing, is to make sure that you can quickly engage and hold that engagement, and that there's no easy way to explain that craft in a session like this. But the part 2 is, how do you keep yourself excited and interested? That is a hard question to answer because I am excited and engaged by all my characters. But if you know your own story from beginning to end right at the start, what's left to engage you? So part of, I think, the joy of writing is the discovery of the rich textures and the unseen threads, and being able to go, oh, that's interesting. Where did that come from? Is that subconscious? How did that? I need to pursue that. So you often scribble it off to the side and go, must come back to that. But you know that if you go off on that journey right now yourself, you might fulfill, might be interesting for you. So what I often do is I often will follow that thread in that moment because you're excited by it and you remain engaged by it as a writer, but it might not make its way into the novel. It might, you've got to be prepared to come back and rip shit and bust as an editor your own material, to take some of those things out and save them for later, and also to make sure that you don't pull the whole story out of shape because you're following a good idea. I had this analogy, I use it more for when I'm talking to script writers on TV around comedy, is that, especially for young children, you've got to, and apologies for how perhaps inappropriate this is, but here in New Zealand, there's a lot of roadkill. We have a lot of possums that run out into the road and get knocked over by vehicles. I see the jokes as roadkill, right? You've got to put them on the road you mustn't put them off for an off-road experience. You mustn't drive your car. Oh, there's a really good joke I'm going to put in here, but you've had to drive off track, off the storyline, miles away, hit the joke and go, right, now I'm going to get back on the road. You try to lay the jokes on the road in front of you. The same goes for any moments of engagement, any moments of drama. They have to somehow feed into the central narrative. You can go off a little bit, but you can't leave that main road, because what happens, you might open up a very exciting, intriguing cul-de-sac, and there's a long way back to bring your reader back and to bring yourself back. Okay, next question. What was your inspiration for the character of Gunther on Jane and the Dragon? I'm going to try not to focus too much on Jane and the Dragon in this session, because we've done quite a few, but I'll answer this one question. But in regard to how it works for other writing in general, is the cast that sit around your main character are there to fulfill your character's ability to grow. So therefore you surround your character with characters that will bring out the best, the worst, will irritate, will prod into action, will throw a light on some aspect of your character. And so when Gunther was being conceived right at the start, I wanted to make sure that he had a very, very simple role right at the beginning in the TV series, was that Jane has earned her place to be a knight, the right to be a knight, for perhaps a whole series of reasons which she will begin to question. Like, is it just because I bring a dragon to the table and it's good for the king to protect the castle? Is it because in a moment of weakness the king said, oh, great, I promised you what would you like, and I want to be a knight of the King's Guard. So it becomes a very specific set of ingredients that build that character. And so I want, thank you for the questions that are coming through, I'll come to them. It becomes a very, very clear way to build something, is I need this character to do that. So Gunther is there as an old-fashioned way of doing it, where people could pay, or fathers could pay a son to be a squire. Essentially, a squire was a knight in training, paid for by a parent, by a a well-wisher, or whatever, and they can work their way up, and so they've earned their place by they've come into this mix because they have the potential to be, they're strong, they're athletic, they could be a knight, they've got the right material, and they've got a patron who's prepared to pay, and all those different things to support them as they go through. So it became, am I good enough? Am I really here for the right reasons? And Gunther threw up one of those. Sorry. So hello, Bat. Do I have any out of the way detour plot bunnies for opossums from Dragonblade? Yeah, there were quite a lot. I got very distracted by Lavinia's journey, and I also got very distracted by the coconut egg. I went on a big journey too with the bats and the cheese, and realized that I had to. There's a whole world about the fermenting of cheese and caves and what might happen later on, and that just was fun stuff. And I went, no, I can't go there. So what I do, and so to your other question is, I save them, because one of the things I think that I'm very fortunate in that now Jane is she lives in the gestalt of the world, if you like. So I don't have to write everything about her to launch a single short story. So in my dotage, if I get a spare day and I'm sitting in my rocking chair and I want to write a short story about Jane, and I don't want to go to the whole fuss of writing a full novel, I'm going to pull these out and put them up as short stories, and they can just live on social media or they may go up onto Amazon. But that's what I'm doing with them. I'm just pulling them and putting them as a, of course, they might then flourish and they might become an idea that gets lifted out of the Jane world and becomes a children's story about batshit and cheese, but I doubt it would make it as a kid's book. Cool. Nick, let's go to the next question. A child is a beginner of life. It's a really interesting question. A child is a beginner of life. That's okay with a child. But when a teenage boy is a beginner of life, what first step should he take? There's a whole life question in there, isn't there? Which is writing. Writing is a way of bearing your soul to yourself and to other people and going on journeys in a safe way to understand the world. And some of the best books and stories have come from heartfelt moments in our personal lives where we're trying to make sense of something. Now, children do that when they're writing stories at school, and it can be quite challenging for a teacher when they're going, let's write stories about what happened on the summer holiday. And the teacher goes, oh dear, I don't, this is really more than I needed to know about this child. And what do I do with this? And do I go and see the social services? What do I, blah, blah, blah. But because stories are so cathartic, because stories are a really, really important tool for helping us pull something out and throwing it on the wall and looking at it and trying to understand it from a whole series of different perspectives. It can be a great vehicle for writing and developing as a person. Where it becomes challenging, and I've got a friend who's doing this right now, is how do you go public with that story? And then, did you write it for yourself? Did you write it in order to understand that moment in your life? If you're brave enough, and if you're going to go on this journey, that story is probably going to be very, very valuable to somebody else, maybe a whole lot of other people. But that doesn't mean that you should burden yourself necessarily with saying, I need to publish this because this could be very important to a whole lot of other people if you're not prepared for the scrutiny and the extra layer that comes with that. And this is what my friend is going through at the moment. He's been through an unbelievably traumatic experience as a young father. And he's written a novel in order to not novel, but a kind of a biography, autobiography, to understand it. He knows that it could be very valuable to a lot of people, but he's not sure if he can he can sit himself out there in the public and be part of the bigger machine that will come into play as a result of it. So it's really important to understand why you're writing something. But to the point about young people and stories for young people, what is really good about the self-publishing environment at the moment, it's allowing for many more books to be published that are for a niche market that bigger publishers kind of avoid. They have to avoid them because they're not there isn't enough commercial upside for them because they can't sell 100,000 copies and they can't cover their costs of printing and and the machinery of the PR and so forth. So there is now an incredible platform for being able to share stories that will be important for kids of any age group as they're growing up, who will come across some issue for the first time in story form and go, that's me. That's what happened to me. How did, and they will home in on that piece of writing. So without going into too many personal specifics around this stuff, I think everybody has that side to them. They have aspects of growing up that are very personal, very challenging. And if you can find the toolkit to use that for yourself as part of your therapeutic learning and engagement and perhaps to exorcise ghosts, the second step is deciding whether or not this is for other people as well. And that's a whole different discussion that you have to have with people you trust and people who care about you. Because they obviously could be hugely valuable to other people, but hugely challenging for the individual writing it. Okay, next question. Blah, blah, blah. Age groups. There's quite a lot here on age groups and how they break down. So let me see if I can cover them off in one session, really, one answer. Is that, first of all, you got to find your, as a writer, do you want to, are you writing to be a writer? In which case you need to learn each age group and go, I want to write for that age group, learn all the rules for that age group and so forth. Whereas if you've got a specific story to tell, then it's like, where does that story sit in the right age demographic? Where do children come across that moment of learning, etc. And sorry, I'm just checking some texts here. Bear with me. Cool. And so therefore you need to take that story and say, I've got this experience. I want to share it. It was a weird thing. I think it's perfect for 7 to 8 year olds. And then do a little bit of research around that. Talk to potential publishers. Make sure you get the age group right before you really hone in on polishing it, because the polishing of it is usually what defines the age group. You can write a story out in its general form. Here are 12, here's my 12 double page spreads. Here's the 12 moments there. And then you can go, okay, but the complexity of the writing, the complexity of the illustration will define the exact age group of that. Is this story suitable for a 5-year-old or is it more suitable for an 8-year-old? And then the actual construction of that book and the language and the imagery will be defined by that. One of the things that's, and it goes back to what about, teenagers discovering things for the first time or life lessons. One of the exciting things that's now available, of course, is that you can have books that can have multiple texts to them, so that you can create a book that's visually able to be enjoyed by multiple age groups, because it doesn't have violence in it. It doesn't have cute, cuddly hedgehogs. It's whatever. It works for multiple age groups. But then the text can be age specific, so that if someone's learning to read at a later age, they don't have to read a book that's, and by later, I mean adults too, right? I mean, sadly, there are hundreds of thousands of adults in the English-speaking world who are trying to learn to read for the first time as an adult. And they don't really want to be using, books about little pink furry mice to do that. They would much better if they can be engaged by the story as well. And so you can actually define now picture books with multiple layers of text. They can be where the writing can be very simple, but the concepts can be adult, which is perfect for adult learning to read. So the great thing about modern technology is all that is now becoming available. But for a writer of an idea, wanting to pitch it to a certain age group, where it gets kind of locked into book form, um, that's something that is part of the craft, and it's great to go into a library and sit and watch, and just watch which children are engaging with which books and why. Go and talk to teachers, and look at the books that are in each. It's great. Go after school to a local school and see if you're allowed time in there. If you're a mum or dad, I'm sure it'll be fine. It's harder when you become a sort of a grandparent. But if you can find a school where they're quite happy to let you go in and rummage through their library, those teachers have been able to really define the books that sit on the day-to-day shelves in that classroom for that new entrance age groups, the 6 to 7s, the 8 to 9s, and so forth. And you'll very, very quickly see why the teachers are using those books for that age group, and how they're crafted and why they work. And that's one of the fastest bits of university learning you can do. Much better than actually going to college, going to a school and absorb all that hard work that the teachers have done ahead of you. I'm going to say goodbye now. I do appreciate all your questions. Now, I have deliberately not gone to a whole stack of Jane and the Dragon questions that are here. I apologize to you, those of you who've come on board just to hear about Jane and the Dragon, but we'll do a Jane and the Dragon specific one another time. I want to do some that are just the craft of writing children's books. And so we'll do another one of these very soon. But thank you for all your time today. It's now 9:45 in the morning here in New Zealand. And I need my second cup of coffee, which I'm off to now. And then I'm going to be back on trying to edit Dragon Blade. Because that's one of the other questions which I will answer. Yes, I am bringing it out as a finished book, which will be on Amazon, I hope, relatively shortly. But thank you for today. And if you want to, you can come to my website. You come to my TikTok or YouTube channels. Come and find out more about when these things are taking place and some of the other things I'm doing. I love to engage with you, and I want to do it in which is the most efficient way for both yourself and myself. I'm not a qualified teacher, so forgive these as they're the ramblings of someone who's done this for a long time and wants to give back. So thank you. Yes, you too, Lily. Have a lovely day. And Bat, yes, I will do another Jane the Dragon question and answer soon. Thanks, guys. Really appreciate your time today. Take care. Bye-bye.